Dear artist friends, dear art lovers, I would like to welcome you here on behalf of Art Basel, and I would like to introduce myself. I'm Lida van Mengden, and I'm not Margit Rosen, as announced, because Margit is sick and can't come here. So I was asked by Manfred to step in and do this artist talk, and please be kind with me. I had to step in quite in a very short period of time. So, but anyway, I know his work quite well. I was working as a curator at the Wilhelm Hack Museum in Ludwigshafen, and we had the first retrospective show of his work in 1987, and more other shows with his work, so I know it quite well, and I was also writing some articles, so I do know quite a bit about your work. Since the late 60s of the last century, Manfred Mohr is one of the most interesting digital artists. As a pioneer in generative art, he started writing programs as early as 1968. And his work was exhibited for the first time worldwide in a one-man show in Paris in 1971 in the Musée de l'Art Moderne. Since then, he came up continually with highly innovative, intellectual, and scientifically inspired work, in the words of the American art critic Grace Hertland. Since that time, Mohr's oeuvre is internationally present. Today, he is one of the most outstanding artists whose conceptual work has been influential for many artists and the development of the digital art in itself. You wouldn't believe it, but it's true. He received all the awards possible in this field. In 1990, for instance, the renowned Golden Nika at Pre-Electronica in Linz, Austria. In 2006, the Development Digital Art Award, and most important, he will receive next month, on the 22nd of July, the Lifetime Achievement Award of Digital Art in Los Angeles. He gets this wonderful and really very important prize as the fifth person, the fifth artist who gets it. Just to give you an idea about the range of his work. The work of Manfred Mohr is situated between the parameters of the 20th and the 21st century, between the cube, symbol of rationalized thinking and acting in the 20th century, and on the other hand, the ideas of complexity and processing that are considered parameters for the 21st century. Now, Manfred, I would like to ask you to talk a little bit about your beginnings. How did your artistic thinking and working start?
I hope my microphone works. When I went to art school, that was the time of abstract expressionism. That means the informal, abstract world was emotional, and I was very comfortable with this. I was very influenced by a German artist, Sonderborg, who was very speedy in drawing, and this speed excited me, that somebody can let it out in 2 seconds or 1 minute, and that was fantastic for me. But since I also come from the music side, I know that if I have an idea in music, I can write it down. Whereas in an abstract, informal way of doing something, you have no control. So you have to make like 10 drawings to find one which is okay. So that bothered me since the beginning, that art cannot be that you're lucky. Sometimes it works, sometimes not. So I was always thinking, how could I formalize something before I do it? And by chance, I came upon books from a philosopher in Germany, Professor Max Bense, and he really influenced me and changed my whole life view. He talked about rational art. So I didn't know what rational art should look like. And it took me almost 8 years to figure out what rationality means in art. And I started, you might see very old pieces that it's sort of like visual music, and then suddenly little geometric elements came in, a little square, straight line or triangle, and I thought that's rational. But after 5 minutes I understood that's not rational. And the geometry took slowly over, and after 5-6 years of making geometric paintings, I thought, now this is rational. But I suddenly saw that only the making was rational. The content was still nothing. It was, I had no control over the content. So in the next step to this rationality, I met in Paris, where I lived at that time, a French composer who already used the computer to write music. So we had long discussions, and I suddenly realized that is exactly what I need, to write a program which I can run on a computer, and it will execute exactly my thoughts. And that was the beginning of looking for a computer. But
may I ask you something? You, even before you started writing your programs, you restricted your color range to black and white, even when you were working in the Tachist style. What was the reason for that?
well, I thought that I could say everything with yes and no, binary, before I knew that the computer runs in binary. So I had this precognition of binary is my world. And I liked the idea that excluding the colors, nobody can say, oh, this line is beautiful because it's red. If it's beautiful or interesting, it is yes or no. So that's why I stayed in black and white for almost 35 years. But why I went back to color is a different story. We'll find this later.
Yeah.
So now I was at the point that I was ready to learn programming, which was an impossible task at that time. You couldn't go to a school or university. There were only 2 books in the world, an English one and a French one. So I bought both books and studied programming. And luckily, again, something happened. I saw on my television one night a program about the meteorology in Paris, the Institute of Meteorology. And they just got a plotter, which is a drawing machine. And I thought, that's what I need. So I went there and asked, can I work here? But of course, it wasn't so easy. I had to, but they were very welcoming, but I had to write an official letter to the Ministry of whatever, Transport. And lo and behold, 2 or 3 weeks later, I got an answer, and I got an appointment with the Minister of Transport. And we had an interesting discussion, and after a while, he got up, a big man, and put his hand over my shoulder and said, when I was young, I was an artist too. So for that reason, I already had one. So he gave me the permission to use the meteorology computer, which was at that time the most powerful machine in the world, because the meteorologists, they need fast and powerful machines. So I could work every night after the programmers left. I could program and run my programs. And what's very important, to use the plotter to draw the drawings. So I worked there for almost 12 years, almost every night.
May I ask you something? You once said randomness is your whip to make the program running. And as you said, you wrote those programs yourself. In your programs, you use as well fixed rules, but also random devices. How do these two extremes go together? Why do you need them?
Yes, when you write a program, you have a logic of what the program should do. But in the logic, which is also, by the way, called an algorithm. So when you write an algorithm, there could be moments where there are multiple decisions which are in the flow of the information not important. If a cube is turned 10 degrees or 30 degrees, it's really not important for the logic what I want to do. So my programs have always decided of a rigid structure of what has to be done, and another part which it's like float and let randomness come in. And that makes the program also not only multiple, but also, in a sense, more than I can do, because the program will choose random decisions which I might not choose because I might be blocked to use this or that element. So there's a freedom to it for me that the randomness opens up a door of a very interesting constellation in the drawings.
Yeah. And now, why did you choose the cube as the starting point for your artistic work? This is a theme which is now running since 45 years, I think. You are working with that subject, the cube.
Well, before I came to the cube, I wrote these programs which were, of course, influenced by my past of musical writing, linear developments. So I had about 2-3 years of visual music writings. And at that time, also, the director of the Museum of Modern Art in '71 came by and said, wow, let's do something. So he invited me for this famous one-man show, which was the first time ever that an artist had a show with computer works entirely drawn and calculated in a museum. So that show went very well, and after that was sort of a down in my excitement. And I thought, it is very easy for me to write every day another algorithm. That's not it. I should get more of a structure in the whole thing. And I, like always, when I have some sort of philosophical troubles, I go back to music. And I thought, in music, if you hit a piano or you play a tone on a trumpet, everybody can hear that's a piano, that's a trumpet. Why could I not invent myself an instrument, a graphical instrument? And it came to me the idea of a cube. A cube is a rigid structure. I can play with this cube, taking lines away or cutting the cube. You'll see sometimes some images like that. So the cube became my alphabet, and I developed the cube, how should I say, in a way that at one point I thought, if I multiply this complexity of the cube with a higher dimension, like the fourth dimension, which is nothing else than 8 cubes intermingled, I multiplied my vocabulary 8 times. And that worked fantastic. So suddenly I had this incredible, complicated material. And I worked for a few years with this, and then I went one step higher and higher and higher. And like nowadays, I'm up to 11, 12 dimensions. But don't get scared about the word dimension, because it's not the mystical part of a dimension which we don't understand. It's the complexity. It's a mathematical set of rules you can play with, like a piano which is 3 meters long. Many people can play at the same time. So the complexity is my basis of my vocabulary until now.
In your artistic devices, in writing your algorithms, you told me that it was very important for you to break the symmetry of the cube, that you needed to break the symmetry in order to create something new. And I was very impressed about how you explained it to me, why this was so important to you.
Well, one important aspect of my work is that, first of all, I don't want to show the complete structure of any of these cubes or hypercubes. I like to break the symmetry. By breaking the symmetry or cutting the cube, turning it, I create a new visual relationship. And one day I heard on the radio about a physicist who talked about when the Big Bang happened, the creation of the universe, that was only a break of symmetry. And I thought, Jesus, I'm a genius. But it creates a new constellation, the breaking of the symmetry. And so these kind of things go through my work since 40 years. I never show the complete structure. I show aspects of some elements from the structure, but never the totality, because I'm not proving anything mathematically. I want to find something out of the structure which is maybe has a mathematical background, but it is my invention or my finding of a form. And I always project even it's calculated in 10 or 15 dimensions, I project everything in 2 dimensions because I'm interested in creating a semiotic sign, a sign which has no front and back, so the ambiguity of a cube is nil. I'm not interested. I'm also not interested in the dimension, in the space of it, because that's something I get for free with it, but it's not what I want to show. I want to flatten anything what I do to a symbol. And funnily, sometimes when we drink a champagne, and we open the same champagne bottle and take this wire cover up, which looks almost like a cube. I say, I throw it on the floor, make like this, and then it's flat. That's what I do. So that's the easy explanation.
Yeah, now we're in the middle of describing your, the aesthetic of your works. And I remember, because we had lots of exhibitions in the Willem Hack Museum with your works, that at first, without knowing about your project, your vision, I had the impression that these works have got a very artificial way of deconstructing. There were splitters of different forms out of the rectangularity, and like a very strange cubistic atmosphere. And anyway, I was fascinated because it was obvious that this was not a structure which was created by randomness or by feeling, but it was obvious that there was a very strict logic behind it, a very clear order, even if I had no idea about what kind of order or logic it was, but the image conveyed this concreteness of logic and order. And
it's true, because there are 2 kinds of people who, when they look at my work, the one looks at it and sees there is a structure, there is something to it, in it. I can't understand it. They get afraid and say, no, that's nothing. And the other one looks at it and sees the same structure and sees that there is some kind of order in it and takes it as a beginning and said, oh, that's interesting. What did he do there? What does he do? And then it becomes positive. So these two poles I have of people, either they hate it or they love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I look at your works, even from the beginning, one point is very obvious: linearity. It's predominant in your art since the beginning till the year 2000 and even today. So could it be this linearity? Could it be a sort of reminiscence of the restricted possibilities of the technology of the time when you started working with the computer?
Well, the linearity comes, yes, it's. I could only draw with a pen, with a machine. To make a surface was not possible with a pen because it would scratch and it wouldn't be a surface. So the linearity comes with a work that I cannot go around making a surface. I have to draw lines. So that became my alphabet in lines. Mm-hmm. And only much later, when technology came up that you could work on a screen and surfaces could be defined as a gray surface or blue surface. So suddenly the linearity was not so important anymore, and I could use other elements from my hypercubes or whatever, that they are not only lines but also flat surfaces.
Yeah, yeah. And this is what I'm wondering always, because you're working now with algorithms of the higher dimensions. The complexity of your works is augmented to an incredible amount. And anyway, your work, as you just said, is still bound to the two-dimensional. I would have thought that if you came into 11 dimensions, new spaces would open up, but your work sticks to the two-dimensional, and I'm really wondering why this is necessary.
That's how I said before, I'm not into a mystical space. I only am interested in having material to work with, which is the complexity. That's that like in a 10-dimensional cube, there might be 40,000 cubes involved. So, of course, I can't use 40,000 cubes, but I can choose, let's say, 100 or 500 and find something to do with it. So I have so much material to do things. And over the years, I developed, you can imagine a structure can be drawn as a wireframe structure. And then you can go through the structure from one point to the opposite point. And that, going through each dimension once, that's called then a diagonal path. What a diagonal is, everybody knows. In a square, there are two diagonals. But if I go up and over between these 2 points, that's a diagonal path. So in the last, 10 years, I'm working with diagonal path because it's such an incredible visual vocabulary. And I can constantly invent things. I cut out this diagonal path and with a laser out of a steel plate, made sculptures. I made compositions of all sorts of things. And that it's such a rich vocabulary that I don't see any end to it.
Yeah, that's why you work in series, because there are so many possibilities.
Well, if you work with a machine, there's never only one result. There are endless results in a sense. So even early on, I started making series of works just to develop the science in time. But I wasn't really interested in the movie because I wanted to look at each sign as a separate image the time I want to look at it, or I want to go back and look at the sign before and so forth. That I didn't want to have the time as my controlling element. So in 72, I tried a movie, and I made a computer movie with a cube sort of turning and then losing its size. And that was a very educational moment for me where I learned about the cube. But it was so complicated at that time to work with to make a movie that it took me 6 months to make a movie of 2 minutes. And so I gave up and abandoned it. And I didn't look at it for 40 years until last year. We thought, oh, we should look at this movie. And we digitized it, and suddenly I rediscovered my whole past. The cubes, which I searched, what can I do with a cube? Suddenly everything came up when I understood, wow, that was my beginning of the cube. The instrument cube, I made a movie out, and that's up to now an incredible, fantastic element.
Yeah, it's very interesting to watch your movies, as you say, because one can see that small changes in the algorithm, in the process, which is unfolding in front of your eyes, you create an enormous variety of aesthetic expressions. This is really, for me, incredible enrichment of your art, that you created these machines. But at that time when you started creating those machines and the processes unfolding, you started to use color again. You skipped the black and white, and suddenly the color came back.
At one point in my work, it became more and more minimal. And I suddenly couldn't explain to somebody that 5 lines is interesting or complicated. And I was thinking, how could I do something to show the complexity? And I tried to fill out spaces with random colors. And when an element rotates, suddenly the viewer has access to this. Even though he doesn't understand the complexity, neither do I. But visually, it creates somehow a composition, and through the rotation, everybody thinks I got it. And that's what it is. You see a visual result, and you can follow it, how it moves and changes. And that's already a first level of satisfactory, of understanding.
If we are talking about your machines and the process of those algorithms which are changing the visual image continuously, I would like to know if you are more interested in processes or in final results. But because I realized that not only in the time before you worked with the machines, that you are still using singular images, and you are printing them on canvas or painting them on. Yes, I'm curious why you still need those stills, and secondly, what are your criteria for choosing those stills out of this big amount of possible pictures?
Well, as an artist, I'm interested in the result. But I only can get to a result if I have the process. So the process is practically my internal work, which I like, but it's not what I show. I show the result of the process. And since that process can generate endless possibilities, if I want to make a still, I have to choose. And that's a complicated thing, because I have to choose practically subjectively what I want to see. So I make myself sort of a plan. I look for categories, what I print out, like a round, a square, or triangle. So I have little categories, and I'll pick from each category one, and I accept them as, okay, that's a representative of this program. That's how I proceed. Because once I accept the program as I write it, every solution is good. I mean, in a sense, it is right. And even if I don't like it, it is what it is. And to make an analogy to music again, when Bach writes his fugues, it's so rigidly written that sometimes it sounds wrong, but it's right. And that's what fascinates me, that things don't always have to be fantastically beautiful. They can only be sometimes ugly. And that's really what I want, to see the spectrum of myself.
Die Messe ab Basel schließt in 15 Minuten.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
Art Basel show will be closing in 15
Yeah.
minutes.
We are almost finished. I have one more question. And this might be interesting for everybody who knows about the beginnings of computer graphics. I was writing an essay, or I was studying so-called information aesthetics in the time of the 70s, 80s. And I came about all those other computer artists at that time. And Manfred, if I compare your body of work with those early computer graphics which I saw at that time, how come that your visual language and your aesthetic sense is so different from all the others? Because I have to admit, those computer graphics mostly were boring to me. I don't want to offend anybody, but it was a time which was, of course, the starting point. But your work already was different and had, the feeling of rhythm. I mean, this refers to your musical career and whatever.
Yeah, the early programmers, mathematicians and scientists, they wanted to visualize something, either mathematical formula or anything, and they drew lines. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a mathematician. I was a painter. And the first thing which comes in mind when I started drawing with the computer, that I want to refer to my art like I painted before, with thick and thin lines, and make composition, which the scientist doesn't think of. So that was the early, right away difference. And even Friedrich Nake, who is one of the really early mathematicians who made fantastic drawings, he told me, you are the first who drew a thin line in relation to a thick line. And that shows that you're not, that shows that you're an artist and not just a scientist who wanted to visualize something. But then, in the end, I think that I have to use mathematics to certain ways to do things, but I'm not visualizing mathematics. It's like the four wheels on a car. If you want to move, you have wheels. So, when I think I succeeded with a work, it has to stand alone without reference to where it comes from, and has to be strong enough that nobody asks, what is it, how is it made? It is a piece in itself, and when that happens, then I succeed.
Yeah, that's a very nice explanation, and I understand now much more about your work. And I think one could say also then that your process of working makes the question of beauty irrelevant, since your work is based on logic, and logic is absolute order. And that creates what Hegel called the intentional, unintentional Wohlgefallen. I'm sorry, I don't know the translation for Wohlgefallen, but in German, interesseloses Wohlgefallen. And I think this is a very good explanation and description of your work because it stands for itself.